Hola, bienvenidos. Welcome to the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival and Happy Latinx Heritage Month. I am Michael Genhart, and it is my distinct honor to moderate this lovely panel of creators whom I will introduce in a few minutes for this bilingual Storytime Había una vez panel. Before we start, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. If you're a classroom, school, librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. You can enter to win a free virtual visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library, and you can find the link to the entry form in the chat. Okay, you guys are in for a treat with this panel of creators. Let me introduce them. Duncan Tonatiuh is the author, illustrator of Separate is Never Equal, Dear Primo, The Princess and the Warrior, and 10 other books. He's received several accolades for his work, among them the Puda Belpré Medal and multiple honors, the Robert F. Seibert Medal, the Tomas Rivera Mexican-American Children's Book Award, the Americas Award, and the Jane Addams Children's Book Award. Woohoo! Duncan is both Mexican and American. His artwork is inspired by pre-Columbian art. His aim is to create images and stories that honor the past, that are relevant to people, especially children, nowadays. Sara Echenique is a Puerto Rican lawyer and children's author living in South Florida with her 3 young children, husband, and their rescue dog, Luna. In 2022, Roaring Brook Press published her debut middle grade book, Hispanic Star Roberto Clemente, in both English and Spanish. And earlier this year, Charles Bridge published her debut picture book, Our Roof is Blue, Nuestro Techo es Azul, in both English and Spanish. And Lissette Norman is a poet and author of the picture books My Feet Are Laughing and Plátanos Go with Everything. She's also the co-author of the picture books On the Line, My Story Becoming the First African-American Rockette, written with Jennifer Jones, and Until Someone Listens, written with Estela Juarez. She's also a picture book editor. Lisette received her BA in English from SUNY Binghamton and currently lives in New York City. Okay, so we are each going to read excerpts from our respective books. Unfortunately, we don't have time to read all of the books in their entirety because we want to save time for some discussion and to be able to answer some questions from the students at the end. So Duncan, we're going to start with you. I wonder if before you read your book, you might share a few words about what inspired you to write your story, as well as what you hope kids will take away from your book after reading it.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be part of this panel. So my latest book is Juego de Libertad, Mestre Bimba y el Arte de la Capoeira, or in English, Game of Freedom, Mestre Bimba and the Art of Capoeira. And well, I'll show you in the book, but capoeira is a game, and it's a game that I like playing. It's a game that I enjoy. It's a game that millions of people around the world like to practice, that combines aspects of martial arts, dance, music. And one wonderful thing about being an author and an illustrator is that when I'm interested in something, when I care about something, I can try and learn more about it and share with others. And so Mestre Bimba is a very famous capoeirista from the beginning of the 20th century, and he did a lot to bring capoeira from this persecuted art to something that is now played by people nowadays. Entonces eso era de lo que quería hablar un poco quise hacer este libro porque me gusta hacer la capoeira y quise aprender un poquito más de la historia de la capoeira, y les voy a compartir un poco del libro para que puedan ver, para los que no conocen qué es, tal vez les da una idea de la capoeira. Entonces dice, Juego de Libertad, Mestre Bimba y el Arte de la Capoeira. Y dice, Manuel bajó corriendo por las calles empedradas. Podía escuchar el sonido del birimbao. Al acercarse pudo ver un círculo de personas aplaudiendo y cantando. Una meyalúa cortó el viento. El ataque fue esquivado y seguido de una U. Dos jóvenes estaban al centro de la roda jugando capoeira. Bimba, como todos llamaban a Manuel, quería jugar también. Le encantaba la capoeira con sus patadas y acrobacias ejecutadas al ritmo de la música. So here, if we can go back one just briefly, we can see Manuel, this boy, running when he hears the sound of the birimbao. And when he gets closer, there's people clapping and singing. And in the middle of the circle, there's people doing kicks and acrobatic moves. They're playing capoeira. And that's Manuel's favorite activity. But Manuel, everyone called him Bimba. That was his nickname, and that's what most people refer to him as. And then here, capoeira was practiced mostly. This book takes place in the beginning of in the early 20th century in the city of Salvador, in the state of Bahia in Brazil. And the people that played capoeira were the descendants of enslaved Africans that had been brought to Brazil, to the Americas, and forced to work. And when they came, they brought different traditions, they brought different music, and when they came to this new land, their traditions, their customs combined, and new forms of religion appeared, new types of music like samba appeared. But another activity that appeared was capoeira, which combined music, dance, and fighting. Entonces aquí podemos ver a Bimba y todas las otras personas que practicaban capoeira como él al principio del siglo XX eran personas negras, que eran descendientes de personas que habían sido esclavizadas y habían sido traídas de África y habían sido traídas a Brasil. Y cuando llegaron a Brasil, que era una colonia portuguesa, pues traían diferentes costumbres, traían diferentes tipos de música, de tradiciones, y en el Nuevo Mundo se combinaron. Y una de estas combinaciones, una nueva expresión cultural que apareció fue la capoeira, que combinaba lucha, que combinaba música y combinaba también danza. But capoeira was not, the people that were in power, which were mostly white, did not think well of capoeira. They thought it was an activity that was practiced by malandros, that was practiced by thugs, and it was actually prohibited to do capoeira. And if the police saw people doing capoeira in the streets, they would chase them and throw them in jail. Entonces dice que en la década de 1910, cuando Bimba era un adolescente, los ricos y poderosos de Salvador eran en su mayoría blancos. A ellos no le importaban estas expresiones negras. A menudo las desdeñaban, en especial la capoeira, que les parecía una salvajada practicada por malandros. Bimba no se sorprendió de que, antes de poder entrar a la roda, al círculo de personas jugando, alguien gritara, ¡la policía! Todos corrieron. Era ilegal jugar capoeira en las calles. La policía golpeaba y metía a la cárcel a los capoeiristas que atrapaba. Nos tratan como perros, pensó Bimba mientras escapaba. And so in the rest of the book, what I show is all these different things that Bimba did, like create a new style of capoeira, open up a school, create different graduations for people that learn capoeira, and even challenge other capoeiristas and other fighters in the ring to show that capoeira could be a powerful martial art. And all these different steps that he took, all these different actions that he took, helped take capoeira from being something that the police chased you and threw you in jail to an activity that is now practiced by millions of people around the world. Y entonces en el libro después lo que platica es diferentes cosas que hizo Bimba, como crear su propio método de capoeira, que le llamó capoeira regional, abrir una escuela, e inclusive retar a otros peleadores para luchar en el ring, y él usaba la capoeira para demostrar que podía ser un arte marcial efectiva. Y todo esto ayudó a que eventualmente la capoeira fuera reconocida por otras personas y que ya no fuera ilegal jugarla en la calle.
That's beautiful. Thank you. There's so much more to the story. I wonder, is there anything more you want to say, Duncan, about what you hope kids will take away from the story?
Well, first off, I think it's an introduction. I don't know how many people are familiar with capoeira, but it's something that I enjoy and that I wish that more people knew about. And I think one really interesting thing about capoeira is that it's so tied to the history of enslaved people in Brazil. So I thought that by talking capoeira, it would be an opportunity to talk about history. And also one thing that people say capoeira is that it's a fight of resistance. That's why I call it game of freedom, because it's an opportunity for people that show even under circumstances where they were marginalized, where they were oppressed, they still managed to find ways to do something that made them feel good, that made them feel strong, that was beautiful, to create beauty. So I think it's just it's a beautiful art form, and I want more people to learn about it. That's maybe it.
After we're all done reading, we'll have a chance to dive into the books a little more deeply, but that's great. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.
Okay, Lisette, you're up next. And if you could start by talking as well about what inspired you to write your story.
Okay, so this story, Plátanos Go with Everything, is the cover. Oh, well, you can see it there. I was actually, which is, by the way, the illustrations by Sara Palacios and the translation by Kiani Antigua. And I was inspired to write this story while I was cooking plátanos. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to cook with them, and I realized that I had a lot of options. And so I was like, wow, you can really cook plátanos with, everything. So I got the title first, and then from there, I just sat down and started writing this book. So that's pretty much how it happened. And it's about a young girl, Yesenia, the main character, who loves plátanos. And I don't know if there's anyone who loves plátanos more than her. And I'll read a little bit from the book, and you'll see that she'll talk about why Dominicans love plátanos so much and all the different things that you can eat with plátanos. So I'll start reading. It's a little bit windy here. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So, and I'll read in Spanish, by the way. Los plátanos son como rebanadas doradas de un atardecer en nuestros platos. Ayudo a mami en la cocina. Ella comparte historias de su vida en la República Dominicana. Desde antes que Kendry, mi hermano mayor, y yo naciéramos. Las historias de mami son los ingredientes secretos de todas sus ricas comidas. Cuando el pollo, las habichuelas y el arroz están casi listos, mami pela los plátanos con un cuchillo. Primero les corta las puntas, luego desliza el filo del cuchillo a lo largo del plátano. Mientras sus dedos separan las cáscaras verdes de la pulpa amarilla, le pregunto, ¿por qué a los dominicanos les gustan tanto los plátanos? Mami sonríe y responde, porque nos recuerda de dónde venimos, Yesenia. Allá los plátanos crecen así arriba en los árboles, dice mami. Y yo me pregunto, ¿cómo es posible? Los plátanos son largos y pesados, dice mami. Por eso cuelgan y se encorvan al crecer, pero siempre buscan alcanzar a las estrellas. ¡Qué chulo!, pienso. Los plátanos son como una carta de amor de la República Dominicana. And you can turn to the next page. Well, you know what? Let me read that. Let me read that bottom part of it. Sorry. Mis padres se mudaron a la ciudad de Nueva York para darnos una mejor vida a mi hermano y a mí. Pero una larga cadena de plátanos los mantiene unidos a su tierra natal como si fueran chichiguas al viento. Papi dice que cuando le servimos huevos fritos con salami y queso dominicano frito, con plátanos majados a la visita, lo que en verdad les estamos diciendo es, bienvenidos, qué alegría tenerlo en casa. Cuando los dominicanos te ofrecen un mangú tierno y lleno de amor, significa que ya eres parte de la familia. Los plátanos son como superpoderes. Kendry jura que la magia de los plátanos está detrás de cada lanzamiento y cada jonrón de los peloteros dominicanos Pedro Martínez, Robinson Cano y Juan Soto. Los plátanos son como una fiesta. Este viernes, como siempre, hay muchas risas, música y baile. Mis tíos quitan del medio la mesita de la sala. Mami pone su merengue favorito a todo volumen. Cantamos a pleno pulmón, kuliki takati, kuliki takata. La música llena los espacios que nuestras risas no logran alcanzar. Todos mueven las caderas de lado a lado. Mis preocupaciones desaparecen mientras papi me da vueltas y vueltas. Y aquí al final, los dominicanos amamos los plátanos porque hay muchas formas de disfrutarlos. Con huevos y queso o arroz y habichuela, fritos o majados y rellenos de camarones. Los plátanos van con las fiestas en casa, con la tristeza y los sueños de nuestra familia, que esperan hacerse realidad. Lo mejor de todo es que van con el amor. Los plátanos van con todo.
So beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Lisette. Do you want to say a few words about what you hope kids will take away from reading your book?
Well, first of all, I hope that they can take away that our stories are just as important and important enough to be in books, because when I was younger, I didn't see them. I didn't see our stories in books. And I thought that it meant that our stories weren't important enough to be in books. So I wanted them to see this. I'm happy that they're seeing that our stories. There are a lot more books now, and they can know that and understand that, yes, our stories matter and they belong in books.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you so much. We'll
Sure.
get into that topic a bit more in a few minutes. Sara, I wonder if you could share your book now and maybe start with saying a few things about what inspired you to write your story.
Absolutely. Hola, soy Sara. As Michael mentioned, I'm from Puerto Rico, depending on which language you're speaking. I grew up there. My family's still there. And some of you may know, some of you might be too young to remember this, that in 2017, so 6 years ago on Wednesday or Tuesday earlier this week, Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico. It devastated communities. It left millions without power, without water, without gas. It was a total devastation. And I visited Puerto Rico that December, so just a few months later. And while I was there, I was really struck by the sea of the blue tarp roofs that were everywhere. So for those of you who don't know, and what you'll see in the book, is a blue tarp roof. Blue tarp is what you might use as a temporary roof. If the structure of your roof or whatever has happened to it is just not it's not doing what it's supposed to do, right? Keeping the water out, keeping nature out effectively, and keeping you safe. And these blue tarps are supposed to be used for 30, 60, 90 days. But what we saw in December was they were still being used. That was several months later. And actually 6 years later, there are more than 3,000 homes that still are using those blue tarp roofs. And so I was really inspired to think about what that experience might be for the children in particular in Puerto Rico. And so that's what my story imagines. So this is Nuestro techo es azul. Thank you. Nuestro techo es azul, blue, pero no cerúleo como el cielo o el turquesa del mar. Es un azul profundo y brillante, como las plumas de un pavo real o un guacamayo azul. Antes de que nuestro techo fuera azul, era un gris blanco. Nuestro techo solía mantener la luz afuera y el fresco adentro. De noche yo cerraba los ojos y le preguntaba a mi hermano Antonio, ¿me haces un cuento? Antonio me contaba cuentos mágicos todas las noches, mientras los coquíes cantaban y los gallos dejaban de revolverse. So anyone who hasn't been to Puerto Rico, coquíes are these tiny little frogs with really powerful voices, which I think is just a fantastic metaphor for Puerto Ricans in general. And if you ever do visit, I encourage you to just take a moment in silence and listen to them because it's really beautiful. Me dormía con el ritmo leve de su voz. Incluso me contó una historia la noche antes de la tormenta, cuando me temblaban las manos. Nos preparamos la mañana antes de la tormenta. Llenamos nuestra bañera con agua y compramos mucha, pero mucha comida, baterías y papel higiénico. Mami y papi cubrieron nuestras ventanas con tablas de madera y metal. Probamos nuestras linternas y faroles por si acaso. Antonio y yo practicamos orientarnos por la casa con nuestras linternas de exploradores. Pensábamos que estábamos listos para lo que pudiera soplar por nuestro camino. Pero entonces, la tormenta sopló fuerte y feroz todo el día y toda la noche. El viento hacía pasar la lluvia por los bordes de las ventanas y ésta se colaba por debajo de nuestras puertas. Actué de manera valiente para sentirme valiente. Por dentro, mi corazón latía con fuerza. Mi estómago se sentía pequeño y pesado, como si estuviera lleno de piedras. Durante la tormenta, se fue la luz y las tablas de madera temblaban y amenazaban con caerse. Así que los 5 encontramos un closet en la oscuridad. Nos sentamos allí durante horas jugando con nuestras linternas. Cuando cesaron los vientos poderosos, mami y papi nos pidieron que nos quedáramos mientras ellos iban a mirar. Pero Antonio y yo nos asomamos por la puerta del closet. La tormenta había volado nuestro techo blanco grisáceo. Después de la tormenta, mientras nuestra casa se secaba, tuvimos que pasar unos días con Titi Carmen y tío Alfonso. Ya estamos de vuelta. Por ahora nuestro techo es una lona azul temporal. That's the blue tarp I was talking about. Y la voz de Antonio ha desaparecido. ¿Me haces un cuento? Le pregunto a Antonio, pero no responde. Él no ha hablado desde la tormenta. Por las mañanas, cuando la brisa sopla, Antonio y yo fingimos que flotamos suavemente hasta la tierra con nuestros paracaídas azules y fieles. Por las tardes buceamos en aguas profundas y nadamos junto a criaturas desconocidas y tesoros olvidados. Actúo de manera valiente para sentirme valiente. Le digo, sigo buscando tu voz para que no se lo olvide. Cuando cae la noche, seguimos el movimiento moteado de las sombras de los árboles. Sus hojas nuevas se convierten en guacamayos vivaces y garzas azules ágiles, que perseguimos hasta que se esconden. Encontraremos tu voz pronto, te lo prometo, I promise. Antonio me da una sonrisa triste, pero aún no hay respuesta, no hay cuentos. Antes de la tormenta, no podíamos escuchar el golpeteo de la lluvia en nuestro techo. El techo azul a veces forma un charco tan grande que mami tiene que empujarle la barriga con una escoba para que el agua no nos caiga encima. Corremos afuera. Tomo la mano de Antonio y esperamos por la cascada efímera que mami empuja hacia arriba y hacia afuera de nuestro techo azul. Después de más de un mes con nuestro techo azul, mami, papi, Titi Carmen, tío Alfonso y muchos de nuestros amigos se reúnen en nuestro patio delantero al lado de la camioneta de Titi. Rebosa con herramientas. Desmontan nuestro techo azul y lo colocan cuidadosamente sobre la grama. Antonio y yo encontramos las piedras más pesadas para asegurarnos de que el azul no se vaya volando. Traemos agua y meriendas mientras ellos trabajan durante días y días. Por varias noches no hay techo. Vemos las estrellas desde nuestras camas. Actúo de manera valiente para sentirme valiente. Le digo a Antonio que nuestro techo nuevo será mejor que nuestro techo viejo, nuestro techo azul o incluso este techo de estrellas brillantes. Nuestro techo nuevo se quedará y nos mantendrá secos. Estará aquí para siempre, para nosotros 5. Le pregunto, ¿me haces un cuento? Pero sigue sin responder. Me pregunto si su voz brillante se esconde entre las estrellas. We can probably stop there because I know that we want to make sure everyone can read. Thank you.
Okay, great. Do you want to end, Sara, by saying a few things about what you hope kids will take away from reading your book?
Absolutely. So I know I'm constantly inspired by my home by Puerto Rico. Just people on the island especially are just put in these completely untenable positions only to find really creative solutions to the problems that might break others, but especially children who have no say in it. They're not necessarily getting all the information that, you know, the adults might be getting. And so I wanted to make sure that their story is being told too. And this is just one very small part of the story of their lives. And I hope it'll be one that they will be able to put in their, you know, in the rearview mirror and move on. But I know that's an impactful one. So I just wanted to make sure that that was something that they could see in themselves and also others who might have experienced something similar or just generally in this world, because that is, you know, natural disasters happen all the time, that they can see they're not alone and that there's action that they can take. So in the back, there's back matter on what they can do to help fight against things like climate change that actually make these storms more powerful. So effectively, I want them to feel empowered at the end of the day.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share my book. I didn't introduce myself earlier. I wanted just to say a few words. I, by day, work as a clinical psychologist in San Francisco in private practice. And by night, I write picture books. Some of my more recent books include Mayor Laipi Deliciosa and They're So Flamboyant. And my most recent book, which I'll share in a few minutes, is called Spanish is the Language of My Family. El español es la lengua de mi familia. And this book was inspired by stories my mother, who's Mexican-American, shared with me when I was a child. Her first language was Spanish. She grew up in Southern California. And at that time, and for generations before and after her, Spanish was prohibited to be spoken in public schools. In fact, kids were punished and shamed severely for speaking their language. And it's an untold story, really, sort of a hidden history, a shameful part of American history. And so I wrote this book as a way of telling this untold story, but also I wanted to offer a kind of healing and a kind of reclaiming of the dignity that was taken away from these children. And ultimately, I wanted to write a book that was celebratory, celebrating family and culture and the Spanish language. And I used the National Spanish Spelling Bee, which is a real thing, as a way of telling the story. So here we go. I'll read a few pages. El español es la lengua de mi familia, illustrated by the wonderful Jampara and published by Neil Porter Books. Todos los años mi escuela organiza un concurso de deletreo en español. Soy el primero de mi grupo en inscribirse porque el español es la lengua de mi familia. Ya sé deletrear muchas palabras. Familia es F-A-M-I-L-I-A. Juntos es J-U-N-T-O-S. Corazón es C-O-R-A-Z-O con acento N. Todavía no sé cómo deletrear algunas palabras, así que mi abuela me ayuda a prepararme. Hay una lista de palabras y estudiamos cada una cuidadosamente. Hermoso es H-E-R-M-O-S-O. Orgulloso es O-R-G-U-L-L-O-S-O. Fuerte es F-U-E-R-T-E. Cuando estudia conmigo, mi abuela me cuenta historias de cuando era niña. Me dice que las cosas eran muy diferentes entonces. En su escuela, la regla era solo hablar inglés. Manolito, no se permitía hablar en español, me explica. Ahora es difícil imaginar que estuviera prohibido hablar en español. And that's where I'm going to stop because I want to be able to discuss our stories now. Thank you, all of you, for sharing. So I thought we would start by, since this is a bilingual story time, talking about bilingual books and why they're important. And I'm sure you all are seeing more recently Spanish editions being published simultaneously with English editions, as opposed to historically, they would come out 1 or 2 years later if they came out in Spanish. And so I wonder what your thoughts are about the message that sends to all readers, right? Both about bilingual books, but also the Spanish edition coming out just as the English edition comes out. So who'd like to jump in and respond to that? Duncan? Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think there's a great appetite for them. You know, I made several books. I've made more than 10 books, and that's a question. But only recently have my books started coming out in both languages, and that's a question that I got often. You know, before it's like, oh, is your book available in Spanish? Is your book available in Spanish? And so I think there's a great desire for them. I think there's a great appetite for them, and so I'm happy to know that more publishers are willing to take the risk, so to speak. You know, I think before some publishers were apprehensive of doing a Spanish edition or doing a bilingual book, but I think there's a great need, and I think, you know, I'm bilingual and I feel super lucky because of that. You know, I've had the opportunity to live in different countries, meet all sorts of different people, study in different places. My children are bilingual, and so I think it's a treasure, you know, and I think it's a way to connect with different kinds of people. So I encourage kids to, you know, that are able to speak both English and Spanish and to continue that, because I think it can do wonderful things in your life, both professionally and just recreationally and all sorts of aspects. But so I'm delighted to hear that there's more and more books in Spanish, because I think people really want them.
Yeah. Sara?
Oh, sorry, that's it. I was just going to say, I also am raising my children bilingually. And when my son was born 10 years ago, so he's my firstborn, it was really impossible to find quality books in Spanish that weren't just translations. So for us to now, I have a 1-year-old, to see that there are these quality, really authentic books in a language that's being published on the same level as the English, I think is really important, just even from the way that they view themselves, because they're getting these stories not as leftovers or whoever decided that they can get them later on, and, you know, a year or two later, like you mentioned, they're getting it together. And so it doesn't feel less than, it feels just as important, which is, I think, an important shift in the way that publishing is looking at language. I know way back then they said, oh, Spanish speakers don't read. Well, that's just not true. And I think that we're showing them that because these books are doing well. So I love seeing that parody, and I hope that my kids can see it, and that the kids who are watching can see that as well, that they're important and they matter and the language is important. And giving them these tools is going to help them continue to learn.
Exactly. What are your thoughts, Lisette?
I was going to say, I was very happy when my Plátanos Go with Everything came out. They also put out the bilingual edition. And, I think it's just wonderful that it's accessible to children, so that they can read in their stronger language, in their home language, and they can explore, the differences between language. And in addition to that, and, there being a big appetite for it, it encourages multicultural awareness, in a very gentle way. So, I think it's important. I hope that they start doing that more often, and not waiting a long time after the first, the English edition comes out, because, these children deserve it and they want it. The parents, the caregivers, educators, librarians. So I was happy that my publisher did that.
Yeah. And just to echo some of what you guys are all saying, that to me, it feels like it's not an afterthought. It is thought through from the beginning and prioritized as important. And I think the child readers of all readers will also see that is a theme that is important and not something that you think about maybe later. And when that happens, it sort of seems like it's of lesser importance, right?
And I think books, are an opportunity to connect, and so I think having the book in Spanish also maybe offers, opportunity for grandma who maybe doesn't speak English as well to connect with her grandson, or for a child that maybe speaks Spanish well to connect with some of his or her classmates, because he can read that to others. So I think it just kind of creates more opportunities for connection and interactions of people that are at different levels with their languages.
Totally agree, especially across generations, as you said. That's wonderful. I guess on that topic, another question is, this beautiful collection of books that you all have shared today highlights a lot of themes of family and culture, but across a diverse Latinx landscape. We have the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Mexico. And I wonder what your thoughts are about why it's important to show a diversity of Latinx families with roots in different countries and cultures. And if you could speak to that and what some of the commonalities and differences are, that'd be great. Lisette, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, with my book, talking about food, food connects us all. So even though the book is about a Dominican family, a lot of people can relate to eating plátanos. A lot of people enjoy plátanos. I've received so many comments and messages. I'm reading the note on the screen. So many messages about all the different ways that that people make plátanos and all the different recipes, which is always fun. It's some really wonderful exchanges with that. And then, the other thing is that my book also touches on immigration. We have a family who came to New York from Dominican Republic, and, how they, when we think, it's very similar to what happened in my family and how we established community, wherever we moved to in the United States. And so I think it touches on, I think a lot of people can relate to this story in that way. Everyone has their immigration story, how their parents came, and bring other family members, which also happens in my book. A few family members come and then the rest come behind them. And so yes, I think that's a very common thing.
I can go next if you want. I was just going to say, I love that we're talking about this in Hispanic Heritage Month, because I think at least historically people talk about Hispanic, Latinx, Latin people as all the same. And I think what you're seeing in these stories, what you see now generally, anyone who's been a part of the community already knows it's obvious to us, but not necessarily to everyone, that we're not a monolith. We're not all the same. Even in the language, right? Just because you speak Spanish doesn't mean you speak my Spanish or I speak yours. I'm thinking of words like guagua, right? Other people call that an autobus. I would never in a million years say that unless I'm singing a song about, the wheels on the bus. And so I think it's important to highlight the differences and also recognize that, we are part of a similar community. We have a shared sense of history, for better or worse in some instances, a shared sense of tradition and community. And as you mentioned, family. And I think that's ultimately what brings us together. And also hopefully people who are from different backgrounds can recognize pieces of themselves there as well in our stories.
Thank you, sir. What do you think, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Sara about this, that, the Latinx community is not a monolith community. And, I think earlier we were speaking a little bit about this importance of children seeing themselves reflected in books, and how that is empowering. And I think also just as important is being able to see other kinds of people, see other kinds of cultures as well. All the other books that I've done before this one, Game of Freedom, have to do with Mexican culture, Mexican American culture, because that's the culture I belong to. That's what I'm most familiar with. Hopefully I did a good job. I'm not Brazilian, but hopefully I did a good job with Game of Freedom, because it's something that I'm passionate about, that I'm really into, something that I practice and that I wanted to learn more about. But I think also because I think it's important to show different kinds of people, different kinds of experiences, and I think then that helps. When you do that, then what you see is that there's connections between experiences in different countries and different cultures. Some of them can be kind of unpleasant things like slavery, and whether it's, in Brazil, in the Caribbean, and in the United States, and other things, maybe other, much more positive aspects. But I think it's important to have a wide variety of books, so that people can see themselves in them and also learn about others.
Exactly. We're going to, in a minute or two, move to questions from students, but I wanted just to touch upon, if we could, the themes. There's like a social justice, kind of eco-justice theme in our books. And you're, I think, seeing more of that in books for kids. I wonder what your comments are relative to your books, but also just in general, why that's important to share with kids, these themes of social justice and or environmental or eco justice. What your thoughts are. Sara, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll start. So for me, Our Roof is Blue, Nuestro Techo es Azul. It's a story about these two children in Puerto Rico after the hurricane, but it's more than that. It's a story about the human impact of climate change. And I believe really strongly, and I think everyone here does as well, in respecting your reader and respecting your audience. And in this situation, even though it's a tough topic, it's one that unfortunately children in today's generations are going to have to face it and get through it. And I want to make sure that they feel hopeful and they can understand that we can take action and we can do something about it. And they're actually quite powerful and their voices matter. And how they use those to lessen some of that human impact of climate change will impact our experience as the older adults who've in some ways put them in this unfortunate situation. So I mentioned it earlier, the book has some back matter on that, but there's so many fantastic resources out there on what they can do. The kids who are listening today, you have these amazing adults who've brought you to this festival and you're watching it, and I'm sure that they can help you as well. And you probably already are thinking about sustainability and ways in which you can impact our world. So I'm very excited for you to do that. And I just want you to hopefully be inspired to use your bright minds and your strong spirits to help address this.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sara. Lisette, what are your thoughts?
I think it's really great that we have all these themes in the books because it gives them an opportunity to, to read about different perspectives on these issues as well and see the interconnectedness between all of them. So I think it's important. Like I said, on mine, I touch on like immigration. Sara, her book touches on, the crisis that happened due to climate change. So I think it's important for them to read about that, to learn about it, and to empathize with all the different experiences. So, I mean, I don't have much more to add to that.
Yeah, exactly. Duncan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, social justice is definitely a topic that I'm very interested in, that is important for me, that I've tried to talk about in other books I've done. And I definitely think it's also something that why it made capoeira interesting to me and something that I think differentiates it from other, sports or martial arts or dances or whatnot. I was trying to look for the quote, but in 2014, capoeira was declared an intangible cultural heritage of humanity by UNESCO, and it awarded capoeira that distinction because the game promotes social integration and the memory of resistance to historical oppression. And so I think that's a big part of the game. And I think a person that really kind of promoted this idea was Mr. Vimba, of how taking this game that was suppressed, that people thought it was just something that people did on the streets, that was persecuted, and through different actions that he took, he really tried to give it the dignity, so that people would treat the game with respect, and so that others would begin to appreciate it. But capoeira has always, the music in it, the songs in it, are about the history of Black people in Brazil, and I think that's a very important aspect of capoeira, and hopefully the book kind of can convey some of that, the social aspect of it, that I think is a very, very important aspect of the game.
Totally. What I would add, just to wrap up the question, is I also believe strongly in telling the truth to children, right? In books, they get it and want to and need to hear the truth, especially those, stories that are hidden or not even written in history books. And so I'm a big fan of telling those stories because I think kids need to know and can handle the truth. Okay, let's move on to, speaking of kiddos, some questions from students. Okay, the third graders want to know where each of you are in the world. I am in San Francisco, California.
I'm in South Florida, right above Miami, kind of to the left or the west of Fort Lauderdale.
I am up in the mountains in New Jersey, close to Pennsylvania.
I'm in a city called San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico. If you look at a map of Mexico, it's kind of like in the middle.
So we are all over the place. Isn't that lovely? Okay. Students in Irving, Texas want to know if you all know any languages outside of Spanish and English. Ooh.
I know a little bit of Portuguese. I call it Portuguese because Portuguese and Spanish are very close to each other, so sometimes I mix them up a little bit. But I can read in Portuguese pretty well. I can understand it very well. When I speak it, I'll make some mistakes, but I can communicate.
And why Portuguese?
That's just something I'm interested in. I studied abroad in Brazil for a semester. I like the music, the culture, and then I started doing capoeira. And because I do capoeira, there's a lot of the songs are all in Portuguese, so that has helped to kind of keep it there in my head. And but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not fluent. Oh, Lisette, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm quick. I don't know any of the language.
I was going to say I'm not fluent, but I can understand it passively Slovak. So my husband is Slovak and he speaks to our children in Slovak. And I've picked up all sorts of things like go to sleep, take a shower, let's get ready for school. So I have really useful phrases that actually maybe some of you out there also know.
One of the consequences of what I was sharing about what inspired me to write my story was that a lot of those children who were punished and shamed grew up and stopped speaking Spanish to their children. So in the US, there are actually multiple generations of very Latina looking people who don't speak a lick of Spanish, right? And that's one of the big reasons, again, families stop because they didn't want their kids to go through the same shaming and punishment. And so I'm a recipient of that. My mother is Latina, mother of 7 children. And we heard Spanish every day because of family all around, my grandparents and aunts and uncles. But she stopped speaking Spanish to us. But we heard it all the time. And so I've been a student of Spanish my entire life. like literally a student of Spanish. So my second language, if you will, is Spanish, but I've had to study it because of what happened historically. Yeah. Is there another question from a student? Did you always know you wanted to write or illustrate books? What do you think, guys? Duncan, did you want to say something?
Sorry. Yeah, I was. I mean, I've been interested in both writing and illustrating since I was pretty young. Since I was a kid, I like comic books. I like reading. So I was writing and drawing since I was in elementary school. But I didn't think about doing children's books till much later. I always thought that was going to maybe. I had different ideas. Maybe I'll write a novel. Maybe I'll write articles for a newspaper. Maybe I'll, make paintings that hang in galleries. And it wasn't until I had almost graduated from college that I first considered doing books for young readers. But by the time I was a teenager, I was very confident that I wanted to write and make visual art for a living. And then picture books are so wonderful because I get to both write and illustrate.
And how did you find your way to children's books?
Well, I had a project in my senior year in college that a professor really liked. I grew up in Mexico, but when I came to the US, I began to miss things about Mexico, and I started making art that was very inspired by Mesoamerican art, by the art that people in ancient Mexico made. And she thought it was very good, and she introduced me to this editor at Abrams, at a company called Abrams, and he liked my work, and I wrote a manuscript, and it kind of went from there. So I was very lucky about that. But I hadn't considered that till I had almost graduated.
Nice. How about you, Lisette?
Can you hear me okay? I had to unplug the mic. Okay, fantastic. And then can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
How did you get into writing books? Did you always want to be a writer?
I've always loved writing, but it wasn't until much later, until I was in college, and after that I took it, I could see it as a career. But I always loved journaling. So in college, I got more serious with the encouragement of professors, which was so wonderful. I had one professor who actually gave me a writing, like a notepad, a blank pad, and she's in a book by Alice Walker, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and she said, I want you to write and fill this book. Like, she just saw something in me and just encouraged me. And then every professor after that, I would take writing classes, and they just kept encouraging me to write. And by the time I graduated, I took it more seriously, because I actually went into college to study psychology. But I switched majors to writing, and I've been writing ever since.
Nice. How about you, Sara?
Yes, I always wanted to be a veterinarian and an author, but I didn't know of what. So I wanted to be James Herriot. And then over time, my dream evolved, and I thought, I like reading and writing, so I'll be a lawyer. So I went to college and law school, and I did that. And when I had my first child that I alluded to earlier, my now 10-year-old, I reconnected with children's books, and I realized that I was really missing that creative outlet, because writing as a lawyer is fun and engaging and you use your mind, but it's a very different kind of fun. So this has been a really fantastic way for me to use my creative mind while I also still practice a lot during the day.
Yeah. And I actually didn't think about writing for kids. I fell in love with picture books when I read them, many of them as parents do, to my daughter, who's now 27, and she's a school teacher. Anyway, when she left to go to college, I started thinking about, maybe this is something I might do, not realizing just how very difficult it is. So it takes a lot of practice. Anyway, the reason that pulled me into writing picture books for kids is it's the time that I most enjoyed when my daughter was young. And so writing picture books brings me back to that time, right? And the joy of reading picture books to her and now to other kids. And so it's been what a wonderful discovery, really. So guys, we are I think out of time. maybe we can briefly take this last question. We have a small collection of children's books in our high school for sharing cultures of elementary students with high school students. Do you have any suggestions of elementary for high school? Oh, it is true that a lot of picture books are used by elder students, for sure. Do you guys have any last thoughts about or recommendations for high schoolers using picture books? I'll just jump in and say, I think a lot of picture book biographies are used by older students for lots of reasons, including, they tell sometimes a difficult story in simpler terms because it's meant for a younger reader, but also the back matter. There's a lot of research that goes into biographies in particular. The back matter is often rich with information. So if you're doing a paper on blah, 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 I think a picture book is actually a good resource, a biography. Anyone else have any last thoughts before we part ways?
I was just going to say, if you're an elementary student and you connect with a book, that's the one I would share. If I understood that question correctly, anything that's illustrated, I feel like just right for discussion, especially because you can interpret those illustrations and the story that's going on behind the story that's being told in lots of different ways, which can be really fun and engaging.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for attending our panel. Gracias por estar con nosotros. And thank you to our lovely panel. You guys have been incredible. I appreciate your work and your thoughtfulness. Viewers, go out and get their books, read their books, and share with others. And thank you for the viewers for tuning in. And adios. Happy Latinx Heritage Month. Take care, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.